I'm Carol Klein, and this is my home, Glebe Cottage. When I'm not presenting or writing about gardening, this is where I spend most of my time, and where I've been honing my horticultural skills for 40 years. Whether you've got a spacious plot, a tiny patio, or a few window boxes, there's nothing more exciting and satisfying than creating your own garden. From basic to more advanced techniques, I believe anyone can learn how to do it. Whether you're a complete novice or an experienced gardener, I want to help you develop the skills to make your garden grow. I'm ready. Are you? Hi, Sil. Welcome back to the garden. Everything is just beginning to truly burgeon. As you look across the garden, you can see all the trees bursting forth. There's a bronze haze across the cercidiphyllum as their leaves start to open. And although all that's going on up there, it's right down here at ground level that you really notice the difference. Plants everywhere just putting on this spurt. And I think the plant that's most iconic of this whole process has to be the erythroniums, the dog's tooth violets. They're utterly lovely. The flowers themselves are just so elegant. Such a small plant, and yet it's got such charisma. First of all, the buds are turned down, and then gradually, the stems come up and the petals begin to open. And before you know where you are, they form this sort of Turk's cap with these lovely reflex petals. Most of them are whites and yellows, but there are pinks as well. Nothing could be more beautiful. To me, this is one of the most charming of all these dog's tooth violets. It's one called Erythronium revolutum Knightshays, and it's named after Knightshays Court, a National Trust property near Tiverton, not that far away. And if you go there in the woodland, it absolutely carpets the floor. As for growing conditions, well, like any other plant, think about where they come from. So these are woodland plants. That's the sort of soil they love, the kind of conditions they like. Lots of light during the spring, and then later on, the shade of the trees. This is actually the perfect spot. Even if you've got a small garden, under a shrub is a perfect place for them. And they can put these deep, deep roots, these dog's tooth roots, way down into the soil. Now, I think I can probably show you on this. Can you see this lovely long root? So in that woodland soil where they come from, these roots will go right down in between the tree roots and gather up whatever goodness there is there. They'll rest dormant during the summer, and then over the winter, things will start to move. So you can buy your erythroniums in flower in pots, and then you can see exactly what you've got. Or you can buy them in the autumn as bulbs. And then when you plant them, take something like a cabbage trowel with a long pointed end, and you can make that hole really, really deep. If you've given them the right place, planted them beautifully, you'll be rewarded with a picture like this for years and years and years. Whilst erythroniums will happily do their own thing, there are other parts of the garden where a bit of intervention pays dividends. Look at that. This really is the time for camellias. All these buds are opening up and these beautiful, perfect flowers are looking grand. And what's more, I've had to do nothing to it at all. But at my feet is a sea of neglect, something I really haven't done and I should have done. There's a great mass of this lovely epimedium. It's one called Versicolor. Versicolor neosulphureum. It's one of my favourite ground covering plants and it's taken its job very literally in this bed. What was once those beautiful leaves during the winter are now looking much the worse for wear, and I should have cut them right down to the ground because now they're inhibiting the growth of all those beautiful new shoots that are just peeping through and the lovely pale yellow flowers. And with a plant like this, you really want to make the most of it. You want to enjoy it in its full springtime beauty. So it's a bit late for this plant, but there are a few other clumps where it's not too late to show you what to do. Epimediums really benefit from a bit of TLC. Cutting back the old leaves in spring allows the new shoots to come through and enables you to enjoy the beauty of the flowers. Just go down to the bottom of this clump and cut very carefully. It's almost a nail scissors job. But I can see on this clump now, it's quite exciting actually, because when you get into the middle here, you can see, moving that geranium leaf out of the way, you see these lovely new leaves just beginning to come out and these buds emerging. And here, one of the flowers is actually broken through. And as you go, you're just gradually revealing more and more of all the new growth that's coming. I've got a few other varieties of epimediums that I'm going to put into a raised bed by the potting shed. Come on, Fief. Where they can be appreciated at close quarters. It's so lovely when you've done a job like that and you know that in a few weeks' time those flowers will be out, the new leaves will be up and the whole place is going to look quite different. Look at this Perrins pink with these big wide flowers. So graceful, so beautiful. And you can hardly see the stems. It's almost like the flowers are floating in mid-air. What about this one? This is Warliensis, Ellen Wilmot. Ellen Wilmot was a very famous lady gardener with a beautiful garden at Warley House, and presumably this arose there. I love these little tiny rusty coloured flowers, so dainty. I adore this one too, it's royal purple. Just look at that. Even the leaves are tinged with pink, as though somebody painted them specifically to go with the flowers. And I want to use this one, and I think this. In this bed with the erythroniums, I actually want to plant out these new ones. I think this pale pink one is going to look beautiful too. Just the right place for them. I love these two in here, I think, because they just go with everything. But with all the hellebores that are in here, and absolutely delightful with these erythroniums. So I've already added loads of good compost in here, but you don't really need to improve the soil when you're planting them. So let's tip this one out. It's a little, oh, precious cargo this, isn't it? Look at that. Isn't it just lovely? And lower it down, and you can tell straight away it's happy. Here we go. Now, if you want to make more of your epimediums, Versicolor will just spread itself everywhere. But some of these others can be divided, and the best time to do it probably is in late autumn or early spring before anything shows up. Coming up, how to plant a statement tree or shrub in your garden. They call this the planting dance, but if you're from down south, I think it's the planting dance. Seeing trees bursting into life in springtime is such a joy, and you don't have to live in the country to revel in their beauty. Our local parks are full of interesting varieties, and it's a great way to get inspiration for planting a new tree or shrub in your own garden. Oh, whether it's cherry blossom with these great big sort of ice cream flowers, or a magnificent magnolia. They're such familiar trees, especially at this time of year. We notice them with these huge goblets of flowers. Even in a huge park like this, where you've got these enormous trees around the edge, there are trees that you can imagine growing in your own garden, like this lovely crabapple. It's absolutely thick with blossom, and the insects are already beginning to move in. And every tree has its own personality, its own character. And when you just look at the trunk of this one and you see these lovely twirls, you just wonder what made it do that in the first place. Whatever it was, it's lived through it. It's lived to tell the story and to go on blossoming year after year. It pays to keep your eyes open and to look up. In my garden, this is the perfect time to enjoy the trees in their spring finery. Just look at that. Isn't it splendid? This is one of my two magnolias. This one is Magnolia Leonard Messel, and I just think it is a total delight. I got quite worried about it earlier on because the buds seemed very tight, but this spring sunshine has really brought them out. It's utterly lovely. It's a great one for a smaller garden too. I'm hoping this magnolia is going to go on and on for years, but all trees and shrubs have a finite life, and I've got one in the corner up here which has probably reached the end of its life too. So I'm going to take it out, but I'm going to replace it with something completely new. I think it's really important to recognise if something's died, then thank it very much for what it's done, what it's been, how much you've enjoyed it, and then take it out. I've already decided on the perfect shrub for this spot. But first, I've got to make sure this bed is ready to welcome it. And that means weeding. So right through here, there's masses and masses of ground elder. Look at it, it's just emerging now, but when it gets going, it's extremely vigorous. And it's one of the most common weeds and just about the most difficult to eradicate because it sends out these long roots. I think the Romans introduced it, and you can eat them or you can polish your silver with them. But since I've got no silver, I want to get rid of it completely. Put it to one side there. Look at that. I'm not going to weed it in situ. So after I've dug through this, I'm going to add masses and masses of really good organic stuff. So now one of the most vital ingredients in my replanting. This is some of my gorgeous compost. It's been in the making for more than a year or so, and it's rich, it's absolutely full of nutrients, which are going to feed whatever I plant in there. But I don't actually feed the plant, it's the soil that feeds the plants. So I've got to feed the soil. This is lovely stuff. It's quite fibrous, but it is completely rotted. I'm going to put some all over this little bed. So I'll incorporate that. I'll actually dig this in. Right. That'll do. Now I want to get the main player. This is it. Euonymus europaeus. I'm calling it a shrub, but sometimes it grows to the proportions of a small tree. It has tiny little green flowers which must be rich in nectar, because later on it's adorned with the most delightful berries, but at exactly the same time that they really start to be at their best, it's accompanied by the foliage which turns brilliant red, really the most beautiful colour. And I could do with something over here really that's got good autumn colour. So come on, spindle. Ready for your new home? Yeah. I want to dig a hole that's very much bigger than the size of the pot. I don't want it just to sit in this hole that's the exact same size, because I really need to encourage those roots to move into the soil. Let's have a look at this first though. Look at that. Really, really fibrous roots. And I'll just break them up a little bit with my extremely sharp, well manicured nails, like that. And that will just help them spread out into the soil. So there it goes. It's vitally important to break up the bottom of the planting hole, because clay can puddle really easily, so the water might just go through it and then stop, and it'll be sitting in stagnant water. Oh, it's lovely, this. Quite fancy getting planted in here myself. Look at this. I wonder if I'd grow. So, going down. Let's have a bit more out there. And I'm just going to squiggle this in. I'm going to plant my scarf if I'm not careful. But there we are. More. And check every so often that soil is being shaken down the side of it, because you don't want air pockets in there. And then I'm going to do the planting dance. So where I come from, they call this the planting dance, but if you're from down south, I think it's the planting dance. Whichever, you're just gently firming that in all around the edge. I think that'll do. It already feels like it should be there. And then I'll just look forward to this burgeoning during the summer, and then this autumn I really hope it will bear some berries. It might not, but whatever happens, it's going to have this glorious red foliage. And when you come round that corner in the autumn, this is what you're going to focus on, with the green of the native hedge behind. It'll just look superb. There is such a multitude of shrubs to choose from. You can't go wrong really. Just try and choose something that's going to give you as much interest as possible right through the year. And also something which is going to love the sort of situation you've got in mind for it. Having said that, most shrubs are hugely accommodating. You really can't go wrong. This has to be one of my favourites. Now, it's not quite at its peak yet, but in a couple of weeks' time, these branches are going to be smothered in these beautiful white flowers. One of the names for it is pearl bush, because the buds are just like little green pearls. And this camellia donation, which I planted round the back of the house, loves it here, where the soil's slightly acidic and it's sheltered by other trees. Look at that. Oh! You just got to look up into this. You feel you're in heaven. It really is paradise. Of course, camellias really enjoy this sort of soil and situation. If you've got very alkaline soil, perhaps you're gardening on chalk or it's very limey, then they're not going to be happy at all. But they're perfect in containers. Really, really good. Big container full of ericaceous compost, and they'll really enjoy life. I don't know that they'll ever grow to this sort of proportion, but really, what could be more beautiful than this? lovely misty morning. Quite cold too. That's the thing about spring. Some days it's really sunny, you can actually feel the sun on your neck, everything's bright and sparkling. And then the next day it can be quiet, misty, peaceful, and a bit cold too. But it gives you an opportunity to see things like this. This is Lathyrus vernus, albo roseus. It's a relation of the sweet pea. It's got these such pretty little pink pea flowers. And albo roseus just means white and pink. And that's exactly what it is. I only put one plant in here, but it's seeded all over the show. It just shows you that this is a plant that's growing in exactly the right place. But there's another place that needs my attention, where it's just as sunny and the soil is just as poor. And I've got big ideas for it. This was always a sort of problematic corner. In fact, it was never a problem really, it was just somewhere I completely forgot about. It was full of docks and nettles, couch grass, all sorts of stuff. And constantly, over the years, I've just had a dig at it here and there, very half-hearted really. The things that are here are thriving, but there are big gaps in between. And I've come up with I hope a solution for this. I want to plant a meadow in between them. Now, don't get the wrong impression. I'm not going to make either a cornfield meadow with poppies and cornflowers and all that sort of thing, but I'm going to make my very own sort of meadow, because I'm not taking out any of the plants that are here at all. Already, there are quite a few perennials growing happily here, but I want this whole area to come to life. What I'll end up with is something that feels like a meadow. You know, in scientific terms, nobody would classify it as one, but what does that matter? If it works, it should be beautiful. There have always been loads of stones here. Providing they don't stop my seed from germinating, it doesn't really matter. This is not going to be a high maintenance area. It's an experiment, really. So my idea is to extend this meadow planting right the way down through this side of the bank on the other side of those steps, so that hopefully when you go up the steps later on in the year, you'll be sort of surrounded by it. But although I've got quite a lot of perennials in here, I want to add a few more, all grown from seed, but this time I've sown them and grown them on in pots. I've got a couple of Gaura here, Gaura lindheimeri. It's a very meadowy plant. It's sort of lilting and lollopy, and it's got little white flowers like butterflies, and these should be really well rooted by now. I mean, there are no rules when you're doing something like this. You're just making it up as you go along, and that's what's so lovely, to get those opportunities in gardening when you can just be a bit creative and do something that perhaps nobody else has done. It should work. Let's hope so. Before I sow any seed here, I'm giving the ground a good watering, which should help the seed to germinate. When you're using wildflower mix, you can go to a garden centre and buy a packet of wildflower seeds, and you'll get all sorts of things in there. But there are several firms that actually specialise in different kinds of wildflower mixes, and that's what I've done. Rather than a traditional meadow mix, which includes grasses, I'm concentrating on a mixture of cornfield annuals and also perennial varieties. That way I'm going to enjoy it this year, hopefully, when all these things burst into flower. That'll be the cornfield annuals. And then in years to come, I'll really have the benefit of all those perennials coming up. And that soil should be covered. I don't want to spill 1 gram of this. Instead of pouring my seed straight into this bowl, what I want to do is mix it with some really dry sand. Now this is proper horticultural sand. And the whole reason for doing this is, once I get this in my hand and start throwing it around this way and that, it's very difficult to control the distribution of it. I'm much more likely to distribute it evenly if it's mixed with loads of another material, providing I make sure it's thoroughly mixed. Ready to sow. The great thing about using sand with it is that you can actually see where you've been. You get some idea of where that seed has gone. This is such a simple process, and you don't need to cover it with soil or compost or even grit. All you need to, once it's sown on this slightly damp soil, is just to walk all over it, just making sure that that seed is in intimate contact with the soil. I'm really looking forward to seeing that develop. But I've sown the seed for this meadow, but there's one meadow plant, Geranium pratense, the meadow cranespill, that sows itself all over the garden. These are Geranium pratense seedlings. They've probably been living in the brick garden now for a couple of years, but there are so many right through this garden, and there are other places where it hasn't self-seeded, where I haven't got any. So I'm going to pot a few up, keep them in reserve, and then when I see a hole or a space where I'd really like one, I can just put them in. So what I'm going to do, I've got a couple of crocks in the bottom of this pot. I mean, I could pot them in something smaller, but why? Because you can make sure then that you're going to have really lovely chunky plants to put out later. This is my usual potting mix. Lots of loam in here, bit of multi-purpose, some extra grit, and a bit of fertiliser. Now, I think this plant has really divided itself already in there. I'll probably take those roots down just to make sure that they're not folded. And I could break some of this soil off. Might do it sort of gingerly, mixing it in with the compost that's in there as I go. In its wild form, it's almost always blue, really beautiful, soft blue. And I think it's lovely when a wild plant can actually come into the garden and become a cultivated one too. I don't mean you dig them up, but yeah, Geranium pratense has become a really favoured garden plant. It seeds itself around everywhere, but not all geraniums come from seed. And to propagate them, I'm going to grow them from root cuttings. This is what I'm after. Geranium sanguineum striatum. It used to be called Geranium sanguineum lancastriense, and it comes from Walney Island, off the Cumbrian coast, or is it the Lancashire coast? And there it grows in very sandy sort of conditions, always in bright sunshine. And although occasionally it'll set seed, the best way, the most reliable way to increase it is from root cuttings. It's really straightforward. Of course, to grow root cuttings, you've got to have some roots, so I'm going to delve down. I'm digging and delving underneath this clump without lifting the whole thing, because what I want to do is expose some of these big, thick roots. I think I'll take those 3. And this little plant, when I've pushed it back down and moved composting around it, won't even know that I've stolen some of its roots and will carry on growing. What's that? About an inch, 2.5 centimetres, and I'm going to cut the whole thing up in sections like that. And the idea is that all along this route there are lots and lots of little nodules. I can feel them, might not be able to see them. And each one of those is capable of actually making a new shoot. And I don't need to worry with this kind of root cuttings about which way up these are, because they're just going to be horizontal. All I need to do is just push them gently into the top of that and they'll root. In a few weeks we'll see the first little green shoots coming up, and shortly after that they'll start forming roots. So when you see those first green leaves, you don't think, oh good, grab hold of them, pop them up, because they won't have made a decent root system, and that's what you need. If they're really skinny, you can even twist them round a little bit, as long as they flush with the compost that's in there. Now put a bit of grit on there first before I forget. So that grit will just keep them in place. If you want to make your own horizontal root cuttings, cut short lengths of root, lie them horizontally flush with the compost, cover with grit and allow the roots and shoots time to develop. This is such a straightforward way of propagating some plants. It doesn't work for everything, but one of the things it does work for are those autumn flowering anemones. And last autumn I took root cuttings of Honorine Joubert. She's one of the most beautiful of those Japanese anemones. But I've got at least a dozen plants from taking those root cuttings, so it's well worth it. Let's show you one of these. These little baby plants. Look at these lovely little roots it's made. It's splendid. So I'm going to pop those on now and very gently push this one down. And all those tiny wiry roots will spread to the edge of the pot. And before I know where I am, I'll have a whole new plant to put out. It's so enjoyable. It's so satisfying. And it kind of teaches you, I think, about the plant. You get better acquainted with it when you start propagating it, whether you're growing it from root cuttings or from seed. This is the summer snowflake. It's Leucojum aestivum. Well, it doesn't feel much like summer today, but it always flowers at this time of year. It's a total delight. It's a native plant. You find it much more commonly in the north of the country. Lots of it in Scotland growing along riverbanks. And it absolutely loves living here. The soil is heavy, the water drains down the slope and feeds it, bringing all sorts of minerals and nutrients to it. Despite its having these big clumps of very dark green, rich green leaves, it's still the most elegant of plants, I think, with these white bells tipped with green. I could admire them all day, but right now it's time to get on with planting more veg. Well, I haven't got a lovely bunch of coconuts, but I've got a lovely barrow full of artichokes. Look at those, aren't they lovely? And I'm going to plant some of them right in here. These two big established plants, I grew from seed initially, but that was a couple of years ago. But although I cropped them, we had a couple of beautiful flowers from them last year. They're never going to make a feast, so I want to plant a whole load more. I've grown more from seed. I sowed the seed last year. They're now really nice, big plants, big enough to go out into the outside world and join these bigger ones. And because this is a deep bed, because I can grow things fairly intensively here, I want to grow quite a few. I'll dig my holes first. If you want your artichokes to go on for years and years and years, which they'll do happily, just getting bigger and bigger and cropping better and better every year, it's a really good idea to feed them with your richest compost in the spring. I'm not using any sort of special planting mixture or anything, just returning the soil now. Won't like that big lump of clay though. Well as their edible qualities, I think they're the most beautiful ornamental plants too. I love these bold grey leaves. I don't know what I like best, the prospect of seeing them growing or the prospect of eating them. Cheeky pheasant again. Fifi! Come on! Well, that's seen him off, at least temporarily. Well, I shan't be harvesting these artichokes until the summer, but I need to harvest these leeks straight away. Just look at the size of them, they're just right. I also ought to get on with sowing some more for this year's crop too. I'm way behind. I'm just putting my label for my leeks. It's an organic one called Bandit. Sometimes I forget to label things. Mind you, this is quite unmistakable because you don't sow many seeds like this, but I always sow my leeks into a deep pot full of really good seed compost. So all I want to do is from a couple of inches above the surface of the compost, just drop them down and move gradually around the pot. I'm holding my breath while I'm doing this because I really want to space them out. It's quite important. You mustn't have them all clumped together or they won't grow properly and you'll have little weedy seedlings when you put them out. Instead of putting grit over the top of here, just for once, I'm not going to. I'm going to use my sieve. And all I want is a very fine layer of compost over the top. Same compost, same time too. That'll do, just so that seed is covered. This whole potful is just going to go under the bench. It's very, very bright though, glass all the way down and we're south facing. But I can virtually forget about them, just making sure they're watered from time to time until they've grown to about this sort of high. And at that stage, they'll have thickened up too. And it's then that I'll tip the whole lot out, have a big handful of young leeks, make deep holes in the ground and drop each seedling in. But until then, this is the place for them. Along with my veg, I always plant some flowers as companion plants, both to attract pollinators and to keep pests away from my crops. So what I want to start with is a tagetes, a French marigold. This one they've named Harlequin. So I want to grow them in here, prick them out eventually, just like I'm starting to do with all these other little seedlings, pot them on individually, and then after all the frost is gone completely, I can plant them out amongst my vegetables. It's not only going to work in terms of deterring pests, but it's also going to look gorgeous. And you can get tagetes of all descriptions, little ones, big ones. This is quite a giant. So I will just sprinkle them over the surface of this. I always try and go round the edge first of all, and then go across the centre. And this time I am going to just put grit over the top of these. These germinate quite rapidly, and when they do, I'll wait for those first true leaves That's all gone to appear. And then it's at that stage that I'll actually prick them out into trays like this and grow them on. Instead of watering these from above, because I don't want to wash away those seeds, I'll just put this into shallow water and wait till that grit on the top has changed colour and I know it's wet. Then I'll put it back up here, nice, bright, sunny place, and wait for them to germinate. My last job today is to plant up the hazel obelisk that I made last time to add height to the brick garden. Very exciting moment this. What I've chosen is a clematis. This is Tangutica. This has lovely yellow lantern-like flowers and also fluffy seed heads, and it flowers for such a long time that you'll often get flowers in the autumn alongside seed heads from the first flowering. So it's perfect, I think, for this position. When you're planting any clematis, it's a good idea to make sure that they're a little bit deeper than they are in the pot, because that way they'll very often make root from some of those other shoots. I want it to have a nice wide base. As it begins to climb, I might even tie some extra supports around here, so it really covers this very, very thickly. Lower it down. This hole's so deep I'm almost falling in it. That's it. This soil, I added loads of really good compost to it first because it was very, very heavy here. And I know this clematis is going to get off to a really flying start here. I want it to absolutely smother these obelisks. And one of the reasons I put this obelisk here is just so I can hold myself up on it. I'm going to water this, plant the others, stand back, admire my handiwork, and just enjoy the garden. Next time, we'll be planting all sorts of exciting bulbs, corms, and tubers. And if you think it's too late to sow more delicious things to eat, then think again. Seeds now, but cabbages later. There's nothing like growing your own veg.